The stale, musty air filled their lungs as the trio descended the chipped stone steps, the rhythmic thud of their boots echoing off the tiled walls. The subway station had been abandoned for decades, its existence almost erased from the city maps, but for those who knew where to look, it was a hidden gem, a forgotten piece of urban decay ripe for exploration. Oliver, the de facto leader of the group, was the first to reach the platform. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing graffiti-covered walls and scattered debris. Behind him, Sarah and Max followed closely, their own lights flickering uncertainly in the oppressive gloom. "Look at this place," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city's pulse above them. "It's like time stopped here." Max, ever the skeptic, snorted. "Yeah, and for good reason. This place is a death trap." Oliver ignored him, moving further along the platform. His excitement was palpable, infectious. They had explored countless abandoned buildings before, but this subway station, buried deep beneath the city, felt different. It was untouched, preserved in a way that gave it an eerie sense of timelessness. "There's supposed to be an old maintenance tunnel around here," Oliver said, scanning the far end of the platform. "That's where the real treasures are." They found the entrance half hidden behind a rusting, dented service door. It groaned in protest as Oliver shoved it open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black corridor. The walls seemed to close in on them as they ventured inside, the air growing colder, more oppressive with each step. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Relax," Oliver replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his stomach. "We'll be fine." The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper underground. The faint sounds of dripping water and the occasional scurrying of unseen vermin were their only companions. They came to a fork in the path, two identical tunnels stretching out before them. Oliver hesitated, looking back at his friends. "Which way?" "Left," Max said, pointing with his flashlight. "Always left." They followed the left-hand tunnel, the air growing colder and more stifling. The silence was absolute now, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on them. It was as if the world above had ceased to exist. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. Oliver and Max spun around, their flashlights dancing wildly across the walls. "What? What is it?" Oliver demanded, his heart pounding. I saw something," Sarah stammered, her face pale. "A shadow. It moved." Max rolled his eyes. "You're just spooking yourself. There's nothing here." But Oliver wasn't so sure. He had felt it too, a presence, watching them from the darkness. He tightened his grip on his flashlight, trying to steady his nerves. "Let's keep moving," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "We're almost there." They pressed on, the tunnel eventually opening into a larger chamber. The walls here were lined with old, rusting lockers and forgotten equipment, remnants of a bygone era. In the center of the room stood a single, intact train car, its once bright paint now faded and peeling. "Jackpot," Oliver breathed, moving toward the car. He tried the door, but it was locked tight. "Help me with this." Max stepped forward, and together they managed to pry the door open with a loud, grating screech. Inside, the car was dark and musty, the seats covered in a thick layer of dust. "Let's split up and check it out," Oliver suggested, his excitement returning. "We'll cover more ground that way." Reluctantly, Sarah and Max agreed, and the three of them fanned out through the train car. Oliver made his way to the front, curious to see the old control panel. As he reached the driver's compartment, a strange feeling washed over him, a sense of being watched, of not being alone. He turned, his flashlight sweeping the car. Shadows danced and shifted, but there was no one there. He shook his head, trying to clear the growing sense of dread. "Just your imagination," he muttered to himself. In the back of the car, Sarah was examining an old, crumpled map when she felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she backed away, her flashlight flickering. "Max! Oliver?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty car. "Guys, I think we should leave." There was no response. Suddenly, the train car shuddered, the lights flickering on and off. Oliver and Max reappeared, their faces mirroring Sarah's fear. "What the hell is going on?" Max demanded. Before anyone could answer, a low, guttural growl reverberated through the car. The temperature plummeted, their breath visible in the frigid air. Shadows coalesced at the far end of the car, forming a dark, indistinct figure. The entity moved toward them, its form shifting and changing, eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and fear, and the trio found themselves rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. "Run!" Oliver shouted, breaking the spell. They bolted from the train car, sprinting back down the tunnel from which they had come. The entity followed, its growls growing louder, more insistent. They reached the fork in the tunnel, but the way they had come was now blocked by a solid wall of darkness. There was no escape. Desperate, Oliver led them down the right-hand tunnel, hoping against hope that it would lead them to safety. The walls seemed to close in on them, the darkness growing deeper, more suffocating. The entity was close behind, feeding off their fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. They could feel its presence, a cold, clammy sensation that clung to their skin, sapping their strength. Ahead, a faint light flickered. An exit? Salvation? They burst into another chamber, this one even larger than the last. The light came from an old, flickering emergency lamp, casting eerie shadows across the room. "We have to keep moving," Oliver urged, though he could barely stand. Sarah and Max nodded, their faces pale and drawn. As they made their way across the chamber, the entity materialized in front of them, blocking their path. Its form was more defined now, a grotesque mockery of a human figure, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice a rasping whisper that filled their minds with terror. "I feed on your fear, your despair. You belong to me." "No!" Oliver shouted, brandishing his flashlight like a weapon. "We will not be your prey." The entity laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "Your fear makes me strong. There is no escape." In a last desperate bid for freedom, Oliver lunged at the entity, his flashlight slicing through the air. The entity dissipated, reforming behind him, its laughter growing louder, more triumphant. "Oliver, stop!" Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "It's feeding off our fear. We have to stay calm." Max, his face a mask of terror, shook his head. "How? How can we stay calm?" "We have to try," Sarah insisted, forcing herself to take slow, deep breaths. Together, the entity's form wavered, its hold on them weakening as they steadied their nerves. But it was not enough. It lunged at them, a wave of darkness crashing over them, dragging them down into a suffocating abyss. In the darkness, Oliver felt a hand grasp his, a lifeline in the void. He squeezed back, knowing it was Sarah. Together they fought against the despair, the fear, refusing to give in. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded. The entity's laughter faded, replaced by an eerie silence. They found themselves back on the platform, the dilapidated train car nowhere in sight. "We made it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We made it." But Oliver knew the truth. They had escaped, but the entity was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next group of explorers to stumble upon its lair. As they climbed the steps back to the surface, the oppressive weight of the subway station lifted, replaced by the familiar sounds of the city. But they would never forget the darkness that had almost consumed them, or the entity that fed on their fear. And they knew, deep down, that they would never be truly free of its shadow.